All right. So what's funny to start is that we're filming this on April 22nd, the day of the faculty meeting where we were supposedly supposed to do this presentation.
Yeah.
But worked out that we're doing this instead, and maybe we'll be able to show you some of this vid at the next faculty meeting.
Right.
So Ben and I decided to have a conversation about a recent thing we did. Visited each other's class for about a week or a week's worth of classes. Life intervened.
I got sick.
You got sick.
Couple days.
That's right. You got sick, and then we got busy. But we did 5 days of visitation of each other's classes. And this was part of Kevin Watkins' academic co-coaching initiative.
Yeah, which both of us kind of encountered at a CTE,
right?
Which we both happened to be there at the same time, and I think we just kind of realized we were pretty like-minded, about our perspective on it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think maybe we was just lucky that we were in that same CTE together. Mm-hmm. I might not have had the motivation if it if it were not you, or if there wasn't somebody from the English faculty together.
Right.
And we both.
Well, there was also that moment where we ran into each other outside the library, and we talked about The Great Gatsby because I saw you reading.
Oh, right.
Gatsby.
Yeah, that's right.
And we started to have a conversation. And
you mentioned, I think at that point you mentioned, okay, I'm going to do a unit in my last quarter on speculative fiction or something like that.
Right. And so both of our interests were peaked even before the CTE.
Right. And I think so we got lucky in a way, because I was originally paired with Joseph Bromfield, and I was excited to visit his class. Mm-hmm. Lots of people have great things to say about him. But it turned out, unfortunately, that we had the same periods free, so that meant we couldn't observe, which led me back to reaching out to you when it worked out. So what's great, I mean, I think you teach all senior English classes, and so that's one thing. I teach some random classes, 3 of the 4 of which would be totally inappropriate, or maybe not inappropriate, would have been not as interesting for us. And so Ben was you were able to come to my Greek class, and I was able to visit your senior class for the new unit.
Yeah, so for the second semester, our English for Regs students, we sort of do a college-style seminar on a topic of the teacher's choosing, which is also meant to replicate a little bit of what they're going to encounter in college. So you got to see, as we started a unit on speculative short stories, and kind of what that whole what the whole seminar style was meant to be. So I think luck played a big role.
I think so too.
In a lot of parts of this process. However, I will say that even if I had been observing one of your
Latin 2 regular
freshmen, I'm certain that I would have had plenty that I would have gotten out of it. If nothing else, the flashbacks to when I was a Latin student here. Yeah.
But I do think you're right. Like, the timing was interesting. One, because we had originally planned to do the first week after spring break, but then pushed it 1 week.
Yeah, because of field day and stuff.
Because of the field day stuff, which actually worked out really well. Because in my class, that first week right after spring break, I was going to be doing the very last unit in the textbook that we were doing, which would not have been as interesting. The boys really had reached their limit with the textbook and were ready to move on. And in the final sort of unit that we were going to be doing in the fourth quarter, we were going to be transitioning to this history of early history of Christianity and looking at the New Testament.
Right.
And so again, the timing worked out because then you could come along. It wasn't just having to listen to us read through a artificial passage about a family, an artificial family in antiquity.
Yeah, and I think that what's interesting about this, and this also factors into, in terms of other teachers doing this or us doing it with other people, is that you do have to kind of get lucky to a certain extent, but you can also, because we did kind of engineer it, so that it would, so that each other would feel more, it would be a little bit more comfortable to come and see the class. which is something that we have the flexibility to do,
Right.
With as long as the format is a little bit open-ended,
Yeah.
like it is.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that we went into it thinking we want this to be open-ended. We don't have a goal. We don't have an end point. We just want to go and first of all, enjoy the experience.
Yeah.
And then see what comes of it, which is why we're doing this video right now as a pilot program for how we might do academic co-coaching
Right.
in lieu of a one-page summary of some sorts.
Yeah, both of us had kind of, and I think we touched on this in the CTE, how that rote exercise in, observing, reflecting, writing had become very rote, I guess. And just the desire to
the motivation,
branch out from that
right.
was a big part of why this worked out for us.
Yeah, I agreed. I've done a number of those observations, mostly intra-departmental, especially in the early years that I was working here, all of which were great for me. But this felt a little bit bigger and freer. When Kevin promoted this, my initial thought was, this is a bigger opportunity here.
Right.
To really see something. Now, I don't think I don't know that Kevin pitched the idea. If you recall, do you recall if Kevin pitched the idea that it would be longer than one day or longer than one period? But when he pitched this to us in the CTE, my initial thought was, okay, this is an opportunity to do something that's a little bit wider open than what we would normally associate with a classroom visitation.
Yeah.
So
likewise,
in that regard, I'm glad we did that. And so I got to visit your class while you were transitioning into a new unit on science fiction or speculative fiction. You got to visit my class when we were switching into a sort of a quasi-intro to the early history of Christianity, because the boys are now switching into reading out of the artificial Greek of the textbook into reading some of the New Testament. I still believe, I know we've joked about this and you've and you disagree, but I still think the opportunities here were slightly asymmetrical, because I got to read a bunch of fiction, and I love reading fiction, and you got to read another textbook, a history textbook.
Well, I think it's just that I read a lot of fiction for my job, and I actually don't get to read textbooks anymore.
Okay,
and it took me back to being a college student a little bit, which was fun.
Yeah,
for sure.
Good. Well, good. I feel better about that now. But I did think, I went home to my wife after the first day, and I was like, babe, look at this collection of short stories that Ben gave me. And I was, I'd read them during my my library supervision period. I texted you a couple of times, like, oh my God, I haven't read this in forever.
Right.
So I think the timing worked out, the material really worked out for us, and I think we also, I felt like I think we both tried our best not to be impositions in the classroom, but I also feel like it was nice to have your voice in the classroom, nice to have another adult in the classroom.
Yeah, for sure.
I really felt just being back in a classroom where I could talk about literature.
Right.
I teach languages, and I have the advantage of getting to teach 3 of them, which gives me some variety, but because I am in a language department, I'm primarily teaching the language.
Yeah.
And we try as best as we can to fold the history and the culture in, but it really gets squeezed a lot of times in the curriculum. So it was great to just be like, hey, we're reading this short story and we're going to discuss it. We're just going to talk about it. That was a really nice experience.
Well, maybe to make you feel a little better about that asymmetry you were talking about, but you didn't have to watch us go through grammar drills, which English is a language class, and we do have to do some of the same vocab stuff. It's not the same, obviously, but I think that the act of sort of contextualizing the language in a greater way is something that both of us were able to sort of easily slide into, because we essentially do that in both of our disciplines. So,
right.
Yeah.
No, I think we both got lucky. I didn't have to observe you do Membeam, and You did observe us do the vocab game that we do.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, we got to avoid that stuff. Well, I'm just going to start then by saying it was a ton of fun.
Yeah.
And I would say as to recommend to anybody else who might be considering this, it was actually a really great time.
Yes.
Not only did I learn a lot, and I didn't go into it expecting to learn a lot, but it was great to be in the classroom, listen to you give a formal presentation on a particular genre of speculative fiction, whether we were talking about dystopias versus utopias, and so forth, and then to physically open up our books, read together, and then talk about it. That was such a great experience.
Yeah, the same. And I think that it was good for the boys too.
Yeah.
Like we talked about, having another teacher in the room,
Right.
mixing it up a little bit,
Right.
Getting that other perspective.
You didn't think that their behavior was changed at all? I didn't know. I've got really good seniors in that section of mine. There's not a ton of them, and I don't know that I could not notice any difference in their behaviors.
The only maybe slight difference I felt was that they were more performative versions of their normal personalities.
That's funny.
Because I've got some guys with some, big personalities in that class.
Yeah.
And I think they maybe kind of leaned into themselves in a good way. I never, I didn't feel like it was certainly like throwing them off too much.
Right, because you know how it is, like when your department chair comes and observes. Right.
Yeah.
The boys sit up straighter. They don't make all the noises that they normally make.
Right.
They raise their hands. Right. They raise their hands when they're about to speak. Yeah. So I didn't get any of that vibe. I mean, I still, some of the guys were still a little sleepy. Yeah. Some of the guys were reticent to talk. Other guys were really chatty.
Right.
And in my guys too, I think the sigh of relief they felt was to be reading something that required a little bit more intellectual rigor on their part than just the going through a passage in Greek with me like they do on most days. So I think that it was they had a chance to speak up more, which was really great. So I was fortunate that nothing felt artificial about it, having the extra adults in the room.
Same here. And I also going back to the fact that we had all seniors in each of our classes.
Yes.
Like, these guys know who we are.
Yes.
They probably, some of them have had classes with us.
Right.
And so that made them, like, oh, it's just Dr. Rader.
Right.
Just sitting here.
Right. Yeah. And what was also the funny crossover is that you had one of my students. In your class too.
Yeah. So I don't know what he thinks about it. Maybe to get him in here.
Yeah. Well, as I remarked to you, I did think it was funny. One particular student, I guess maybe we shouldn't say his name, but anyways, one particular student that I had, many of your students I had as freshmen in my Latin 2 regulars class, and as you can imagine, that's a different kind of class. Maybe you were in the 2 honors class when you were in high school, but no, okay, so maybe you can relate.
Right.
But anyways, the boys at 13 years old in a Latin 2 class have a different kind of personality than they do. So I was pleased with one particular student to see that he was so engaged.
Yeah.
Not only engaged in the conversation in class and engaged with you, but also responding to other students' ideas, but had closely read the text and had really thought about it.
Yeah.
Not just passed his eyes over it and had the one prepared thing to say or some semi-formed thing to say.
Yeah.
This particular student, I think I literally said to you after class, "Oh my God, this student is what a delight he was to have in class."
Well, and that's another stroke of luck, of course. But I will say that this is another opportunity that we can talk about through this process, that we get to see maybe kids that we had before who have really sort of blossomed or grown up in some way. It's an opportunity for us as teachers and educators to gain a little perspective, maybe to cut ourselves some slack.
Right. Yeah.
Because if you had somebody as a freshman and they were a challenge for you as a
Right.
teacher, and then you see that they turned out just fine.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity for us to actually see that happen in a classroom.
Yeah.
So I keep thinking about the sort of possibilities that this exercise offers. You
Right.
know, whether it's me and you doing what we did,
Right.
or just sort of anything like this.
Yeah.
There's so much there. There's so much. It adds so much to my understanding of our students.
Right. Without it being narrowly instrumental in some way,
Correct.
right? Like,
Yeah.
here's what I learned from
Right.
watching your class.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of things that I would say I noticed or observed in the class, and any one of those things I could say, yes, I really liked that thing. It
Yeah.
would be harder for me to say, oh yeah, I'm going to take that thing I saw you do.
Right.
I mean, you give a reading quiz based on the material you've assigned. I give reading quizzes based on the material I've assigned. But I just wanted to use this opportunity to really say, like, what I saw was really, it just reminded me, refreshed me, sort of gave me that feeling I used to have when I taught at the university of just reading something with students,
Yeah.
and then being like, well, what did you think, guys? And then letting their impressions flow, letting their thoughts sort of begin in this inchoate way, and then trying to talk with them through that. And that's what I think you really did well. Like, you took a lot of, obviously there's a lot of sleepiness. Sometimes they read carefully, sometimes they didn't. But you took some of the half-baked, inchoate thoughts and said, okay, that's interesting. And then you turned it back and said, what about this? I really like that. And that's why I came out of the first or the second day of it thinking, oh gosh, right, it's been a long time since I've been able to have that kind of engagement with students. Maybe that's because I teach really much younger students. Maybe the seniors have more maturity there. But that was such a breath of fresh air to be like, oh, right, it's not just me giving them information that I dictate to them to write down, that I expect them to return to me later on.
Right.
It felt more like that college-style lit classroom that I used to do when I was at the uni.
Yeah.
So that was great.
Well, a thing that I saw and felt from your class, it's a really small group in the ancient Greek class.
Yeah.
And they're all like rock stars at language, and I really like felt how well they had been taught. By you, obviously, because
But also all of
because
their
they could
Latin teachers,
translate
yes.
Greek after just however many months. But also because of all of their Latin teachers and all of the knowledge that had just sort of taken root in them.
Yeah.
And it was remarkable. I wouldn't have been able to hold a candle to their ability to make the sort of connections they did and to think on their feet the way they did.
Right.
And it's just such a testament to you and to the department that these guys were so on top of that. Fourth quarter seniors.
Right, exactly.
Still,
Right.
still engaged with the language and the text at that level. I mean, it was really impressive.
Yeah. I think that switching over to the new unit probably helped them a ton, having come back from spring break.
Yeah.
But they really
Always
did.
does.
I mean, they really did. And I've been impressed, obviously, like heading into, in particular, the last quarter, but heading into AP exams, they're stressed.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of work to do. Trying to be mindful about this, of course, but I've been impressed. We've been just continued on in that same unit. We're just, continuing on in that textbook that we're using, in the Greek that we're reading, and they're very insightful.
Yeah.
It's a really nice experience. And the Greek class is a weird class, as it is, but I'm grateful that it's seniors who are in there, because while theoretically younger students could learn the language. It's just a first-year language, right? It's like learning first-year Latin. I mean, there's no reason you couldn't learn first-year Greek in 9th or 10th grade. But I'm really appreciative, given my experience of teaching a lot of 9th graders, having the mature, older students in the classroom, because they contribute. And I also felt that they weren't, with you around, they didn't feel afraid to express themselves.
No.
That I really appreciated, and I didn't get the sense. Maybe you know this better. I did not get the sense from your class that anybody felt
they
nervous with me around.
No, they were themselves, and they were sort of at the, like in each case, we're sort of at the level of their typical engagement. So yeah, I mean, I want to get a copy of that textbook.
Oh,
that's how much I'm enamored with it.
Wow. Okay, I'll just give you my copy.
Maybe over the summer I'll do
Yeah.
a little biblical research.
Okay, yeah, it's a great textbook for that.
I learned more from the reading, the 4 readings that I did about the Bible than I have in the past, since college.
Wow,
since
great.
high school. Yeah.
Wow, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say the same. I mean, like, I turned that thing back into you, but afterwards, you had just mentioned, I mean, again, talk about one of these weird luck things. You had talked about the movie Arrival, a movie that I absolutely love.
Yeah.
And then you said, oh yeah, that story, sadly we can't get to it, but it's in that packet.
Yeah.
And then one day during my library supervision, I was like, oh right, Ben had mentioned that story.
Yeah.
I'm going to just read that story. And I think I texted you right away, and I was like, OMG, this story is so amazing.
Yeah.
So what a great, like I said,
Yeah.
like I get to read the fiction. I know you're happy to read a textbook again, but it was really a really pleasant experience of it. I also appreciate it if we're just talking about like minutia here, like the way that there's clearly an inside joke that you have with the kids about Harry Potter or about young adult novels, but you had this brilliant quip that you made about J.K. Rowling. I don't remember what it was like. She's an amazing quilter of premises or something. It was so brilliant. Not only did it sort of, it was clearly you had this great rapport with the kids and you were joking with them.
Yeah.
It hinted at some historical discourse you have with the boys, but it was such a really great moment while you were introducing dystopian fiction in general, or maybe you were talking magical realism.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about it. So that was really such a great moment.
Well, they try to bring up Harry Potter so often that I have to come up with a lot of different ways to.
So Harry Potter
to
fits
deal
into
with
all
that.
the units that you do throughout the year.
They'll try to fit it into anything. So yeah, that's just something I deal with. Yeah.
Let me see. I have some other things I wanted to just. Yeah, I think really what I wanted to. I think your presentations, your Google, whatever your Google Slides presentation, it's really clear, really great, and I think really the thing that I enjoyed the most was what I felt like I used to do when I was teaching more lit and history classes, but I haven't done it in a long time. But it was great to see you do it again, like the boys. And all people who are approaching this new literature for the first time, they struggle to, and maybe this is part of what y'all do in the English department, try to separate or try to teach them to separate their thoughts and impressions about the things that they're reading from how you approach it, from how you analyze it. And it was nice to see you take their impressions, because I think a lot of them are just, here's my impression, I liked it, I didn't like it, or what I hear from a lot of students, oh, they're stupid or whatever. I don't know why we're reading this.
That was weird. That was
that
crazy.
was weird.
I don't get it.
Right, but it was great. There was lots of moments where in my instinct would be to be like, don't be so judgmental. This is important. We wouldn't assign it to you if it wasn't important. But like you would take this inchoate idea that the kid had that was primarily impressionistic, and then you would sort of turn it into like, okay, well, how then can we call this story magical realism? How then can we call this dystopian? Can we call utopias dystopian in any ways? So it was nice to see that back and forth. I found it this engagement with their impressions, turning it into analysis.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the if not the biggest challenge in an English classroom is separating the I guess what you would call the emotional side of reading a story and reacting to it from the critical side. And we have to find that balance, because man, we really don't want them to feel emotionally distant from what they're reading.
Right.
Because then they're really not going to want to, right? And they're going to lose the connection with reading and literature that's so important. But you also like the ability to think critically about it and to analyze it. I've never. It's always a process of trial and error with every class, trying to find that sort of precise level.
Do you find that their connection to this speculative fiction is a little bit closer, or is a little bit less impressionistic, more open to analysis than in previous units or previous literatures?
I think I'm getting a little bit of that, especially with the guys that I'm teaching this year. I think that they've connected with it a little bit, but I think it has to do with the idea that, like, oh yeah, this kind of stuff, magical stuff, science fiction, whatever, can be critically analyzed the same way you did with, the Shakespeare play, or Gatsby, or, something that we studied last semester, and you rolled your eyes at having to write a theme about. Well, we're still doing that. It's just stuff that's, maybe more familiar to you from pop culture or what have you, from young adult literature. I mean, and my major sort of mission statement in teaching this class is that it is all storytelling. It's all literature, and I want them. What I hope is that they kind of have a after the fact realization that, like, oh, so Great Expectations actually is cool. Like if I can do this if I can look at this stuff critically and sort of see it, now I understand why, Dickens is so brilliant. That's the way ambitious version of how it turns out, but that's the goal.
Yeah.
And kind of what you were saying about that, the sort of an analytical part of it, I noticed as you were beginning to introduce the Bible as a text to them that they're going to read in Greek. You did a great job talking about, and it's a similar thing to separating sort of from the emotional or the impressionistic side of things, talking about how, it is a text that can be read religiously, but it's also a text that can be read historically and as literature. That's a great almost intellectual process for someone
accepting
to go through.
Accepting that there's not just one way to there's not just one way to read it. You don't have to read it in one way, and that I think I felt that the boys were really responsive to it, and were definitely responsive to it the week you were there. And part of the reason is I think a lot of them identify as Christian, or some of them clearly identify as atheists. And so we already had a plurality of approaches in the class naturally. But it was, I think some of them, especially reading that introductory chapter of the book, felt like, oh, okay. I don't so I'm a believer, but I don't have to read this from the perspective of a believer. I can read it from the perspective of a historian, or I can read it from the same perspective I read Mr. Thompson's short stories.
Doesn't make me any less of a Christian or a Jew.
Exactly. And an atheist can look at it and say, hey, like, it's okay to read this. It doesn't make me, it doesn't sort of make me a closet Christian in any way if I'm deciding to read this because the stories are interesting. I might have some interest in it. So I think in years past, as I've taught this class, I always approach the kids, I'm like, okay, in the fourth quarter, we're going to step away from the textbook a bit. And we have some options here. Obviously, there's given their experience of the language and how much they've done. There's only so many options that one can do because some of the Greek is just too advanced for them to get to. Like, I know that you all read Oedipus. You guys, we read some Greek tragedy in our English curriculum. All of that would be extremely difficult for them to read.
I have a
facing page, English and Greek
version of Sophocles.
And that. So I wish that that's the kind of stuff that I taught to graduate students. Right. It's a very hard. So you think, okay, there's not a whole lot. I don't want them to have to slog through. We get to 22 chapters. I'm pushing them, right? Like I don't want to force them to go through 26 chapters, right? So I'm like, okay, what sorts of things can we do? And the classical Greek that they could do without it being extremely difficult isn't the most exciting stuff to do, right? So it's readable, and they would be able to say, hey, look, I've learned these skills, and I'm able to read this actual Greek. Maybe they feel something about that. but the reading itself is boring.
Yeah.
But I'm like, and there's also New Testament Greek, which is easier, as it were. It's the stuff that you learn this year in the first 3 quarters will more than prepare you to be able to read that. So I think I present it in that way, but because a lot of them identify as Christian or have grown up going to church, they automatically are interested in that. So I think it works out because whether they identify as Christian or not, and in last year I had some students who were not as well. They have grown up in the context of it in some way, and so they have a natural interest in it, and so it's a change from the textbook. They have a natural interest in it, whether they identify as Christian or not. And they're just energized because we're not reading the old Greek textbook anymore. So it was great because it just sort of they had this energy. I have seen this aspect of them because during the school year, while we were still doing the fundamentals of Greek grammar, I would make them listen to a podcast every week about Greek history, and they would have to do a write-up of it. So they would write 500 to 750 words about it. So I've always known that they had these intellectual capabilities. Yeah. But it was always in sort of if I had the moment to get to it while I was frog marching them through grammar. But this was great because it was okay, we're going to take a step back a bit and we're going to be able to incorporate these guys in here. Yeah. And the conversation has been very, very interesting thus far. So,
well, one of the, I don't know if we want to do the sort of bird's eye view stuff.
Sure.
But one of the things that that doing this swap, if you will, has made me think about is that I feel a little more comfortable with trying stuff than I did before. Having had somebody come and see my class and sort of, responding to it and feeling like I'm, moving in a certain direction and all of that. Any time that you sort of break out of your comfort zone, especially in a relatively laid back way, like we did, can be motivating. Yeah, I think as a teacher. Yeah. So I felt that for sure, and also it really makes me feel like there are countless opportunities, especially with our faculty. Yeah,
absolutely.
The kind of talented and great teachers that we have on this campus to do this kind of open-ended stuff and see what it leads you to. Right. Without having a sort of set agenda. Right. Because I do think there was a lot of luck in terms of our schedules working out, but there was serendipity that happened because of just the fact that we had a Greek class and an English class and sort of how those things overlap that maybe we didn't realize beforehand.
Yeah, I think it was a ton of luck. Yeah. And we talked about this. I would still certainly love to visit a science class, right? Yeah. Even though I would feel totally out of my depth. But having gone through this experience, I do feel like I can be out of my depth and still feel like it's an enriching experience. Yeah. Just getting to be in the milieu of our colleagues doing their thing. Right. So that I think was really productive for us.
Yeah. For sure. And like I said, seeing the students in a different context, from a different angle than we usually see them, the more that I do that, the more that I am going to empathize with them, I think, and see them as fully rounded people, which is always an extremely important tool to have as a teacher. The ability to see past the walls of your classroom and understand that they have much else going on, and so many other, not just the workload, but just ideas flying into their heads.
That thought occurred to me as well. Yeah, being there, seeing, a student go from your class to my class, you're like, wow, okay, yeah, I guess you do have a a school life outside of my classroom, and so therefore maybe sometimes my expectations of you are too high.
Right.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I noticed this just from the perspective of our schedule as well. Being in a fifth class, as it were, preparing for a fifth class in the day.
Yep.
Really, some days I was like, oh my gosh, okay, right, I have to, you know, I had to sort of
like
really know what I was doing for the day.
Right.
Because lots of times, like, I count on my free periods, I'm like, oh yeah, I can handle that grading in that period. I'm like, oh wait, I'm supposed to be in Ben's class today, or I need to have read this thing. It reminded me a lot about time management.
And they're doing 6 classes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you think, and it's funny. Like, obviously, the rotational schedule is a real boon, but you think like the difference between them when they see you first period versus when they see you in the last period of the day. It's good for me to be reminded about that.
About why they are the way they are when they're at the end of the day. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so I don't know, maybe we'll just wrap this up and just say, hey, you know, like for people who are interested in this, Ben and I both felt like we wanted to try this as an alternative because if anyone felt like the traditional class visit plus reflection plus write-up felt too prescriptive, this might be a more motivational way to get you involved.
Yeah, and it's certainly going to stick with me in terms of what I got out of the experience.
Right.
Much more than it would have been if we had followed that prescriptive kind of model. So I think that this is, you know, at least as a pilot, as we've called it, is a good thing to recommend to people for sure.
And shout out to Kevin for coming up with the idea.
Absolutely.
For sure.
And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was.
You know, definitely something I want to do again.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, cool. Great, man. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for coming, man. That was
Sounds
great.
good.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
All right, Barry.
Thanks, Barry.
That was it? Need some room tone?